Do you ever wonder, what in the world was it thinking when you hear about a ghost haunting someone? Well, now you can find out. In Ghost Stories The Flip Side, Fiona Fabblestabble, ghost and ghost representative, tells the ghost stories from the side of the ghosts. So sit back and get ready for the real story. The Flip Side.
Hi, I'm Fiona Fabblestabble, and I'm a ghost. I'm also a ghost representative. I tell ghost stories from the ghost side. Now, this story here is not exactly a ghost story, but I've been getting a lot of pressure to tell it. It came through the ghost grapevine. If you stick to the end, you'll find out what it's actually about. This happened a long time ago in Louisiana. Forgive me if I get some details wrong. I never went down to the swamps in Louisiana when I was alive. I'm just repeating what I've been told through the ghost grapevine. You know how that goes. This is called What's in the Swamp. So here we go. Lisette and Etienne were sister and brother, 12 and 10 years old. They lived on the outskirts of a swamp with their mama and grandpapa in a tiny shack. Their shoes had holes when they had shoes, and their clothes were threadbare, but they all had each other, and that was the most important thing. Mama rode her bike to work every day, 7 days a week. She worked hard. She worked at a restaurant in a nearby town as a dishwasher and made barely enough to keep them going. It hurt her hands a lot to wash dishes all day, every day, and they were always rough and chapped. And even though she wanted to help cook, and everyone knew she was a good cook, the main cook said she wasn't ready yet. Maybe someday. Lisette and Etienne felt so bad for their mama that they did most of the cleaning around the house and some of the cooking so she could give her poor hands a rest. Their grandpapa had a small skiff, that's a boat like a rowboat, and he used it to go out on the swamp to hunt for critters they could eat or sell. From the time Lisette and Etienne were little, their grandpappy took them out in the skiff and taught them all about the swamp. It was their backyard. There were scary things like snakes and alligators, but also good things like fish and swamp rabbits and turtles. There were lots of birds too, but they were hard to catch. But the best things, and the ones the restaurants liked the most, were the crayfish. The cook at the restaurant their mama worked for would always buy all the crayfish they could catch. The customers loved them. So Lisette and Etienne knew everything there was to know about the swamp, every creature in it, and where to catch the good ones and how to avoid the nasty ones. They even had a pet swamp rabbit they would visit every day. They called him Harry. Yep, they knew every inch of that swamp and everything in it. Or at least they thought they did. One year when winter came, it was colder and harsher than normal, and Grandpapa caught a flu and passed away by spring. If things had been hard before, they were worse now. Lisette and Etienne went into the swamp every day in their little skiff trying to catch food. They weren't as good as Grandpapa had been at it, but they did their best. They couldn't find many crayfish, and the ones they did find were little and not worth much. Every night they came home with their pitiful catch and pulled the skiff up onto the bank of the swamp next to their shack with the oars inside it, hoping for better luck the next day. Then one night, disaster hit. There was a terrible storm, the worst they'd ever seen. The wind blew hurricane strength and rain whipped through the trees. Mama and Lisette and Etienne huddled together in their little shack as it shook and shuddered in the wind. They felt lucky that it stayed standing. The next day, they looked around at the wreckage. Trees were down, ripped up by their roots, thrown about like a giant had been through, bushes pulled up, everything blown around, stuff up in the trees all over the place. At least the trees that were still standing had stuff in them. Mama's bike got crushed by a tree, but they felt lucky to have anything left at all. "Mama, we have to go into the swamp to find Harry," Etienne cried. "Where's the skiff?" They had truly been blessed, even amongst all this disaster, because the skiff was under a log, but it was undamaged except for a little chunk of wood that had been gouged out along the top left side. See, it had sunk down into the wet ground as the log pushed down on it, so it didn't get crushed. It just sunk into the mud. They managed to pull it out and find the oars. The oars had been tossed up into a tree, but Lisette was a good climber. Etienne was too. So she shimmied up the tree and threw the oars down. Mama looked around. She said, "You can go find Harry, but be careful now. I've got to walk to work today. The alligators might be all riled up from the storm. I don't know, so be on the lookout and watch for snakes in the trees." Mama left, walking into town, slowly through the debris left by the storm, picking her way over downed trees and along the path as best she could. Lisette and Etienne put the skiff into the swamp and rowed slowly along toward the spot where they normally found Harry. The swamp was gloomy and a little dark and eerily quiet, and it was a mess. Trees and other vegetation had been torn up and tossed. Branches and leaves were everywhere, and it seemed like all the animals were hiding. They finally found Harry. He crawled out of a small shelter under a tree when they called him. They petted him and gave him some swamp weeds, then went on to see how bad off the swamp was further up. The swamp was so unusually quiet that the only sound was of the oars being dragged through the water as they rowed through it. Suddenly, Etienne quit rowing and put his hand on Lisette's arm. "Did you hear that?" Lisette shook her head. "What was it?" "It almost sounded like a cry for help, but it could have been the wind." "Yeah, but there is no wind." They listened. There it was again, like a small breeze of wind with the word help on it. "Help." "It's coming from over there," Lisette said. They steered in the direction of the sound. "I don't see anything," Etienne said. They heard it again, closer this time. "Help." They paddled over to a big tree on the edge of the water. They looked all around and then up. That's when they saw it. Something white was gleaming in the tree branches. "Help." It was definitely coming from the white thing. "I've never seen this in here before," Etienne said, his eyes wide. I thought we knew everything in this swamp." Tangled up in the branches was a small skeleton, a boy about 5 years old. "He must have gotten blown up into the tree by the storm," Lisette said. "Should we get him down?" Etienne said. "I don't think he can do anything bad to us. He's pretty small. I'm not sure I want to touch bones. I wonder what he feels like. Probably just like the bones of the marsh rabbits Mama stews up sometimes. Besides, there's 2 of us and only 1 of him. And he's pretty tiny." "Please." Lisette and Etienne looked up at the sad little face and made a decision. They banked the skiff and climbed into the tree. Lisette took out her pocket knife and cut the branches while Etienne held on to the little skeleton guy. It watched, shaking with fear. "Try to hold still," Etienne yelled at it. They finally got the little guy free and down to the bank. He stood up, and then he pointed across the water. And there on the opposite bank were 3 skeletons standing and watching them. They hadn't been there before. It looked like a mom, a dad, and another little kid. "Is that your family?" Lisette asked. The little skeleton nodded. "Well, I don't think he can get over there," Etienne said. They looked at each other, then at the little skeleton, then across the water at the family. "I don't think they'll hurt us," Lisette said. "Well, I kind of feel like we have to take him over. We can't just leave him here like this," Etienne said. "Who else is going to help him? It's just us." They carefully loaded the skeleton child into the skiff and paddled slowly across the water to where the family stood, waiting. They helped the little skeleton out of the boat, and he ran up the bank to his family. Then they all disappeared into the woods. Well, Etienne and Lisette watched them go, then turned to each other and agreed to let the swamp keep its secrets and to never tell a soul what had just happened. They went on looking for crawfish because they still had to eat that night. They never did see the skeleton family again, but they didn't look too hard either. Their kindness was rewarded, though, because every time they went into the swamp, there was a big pile of the best crawfish waiting for them on the bank where the skeleton family had been. So that story comes to us from Duante, one of the ghosts here who can talk to skeletons. The skeleton family wanted it told to show that, yes, skeletons have feelings too. Hold your bones. Duante has something to add. There's a little more to this story, an epilogue. This is Duante. Yeah, since Lisette and Etienne were able to get crawfish every day, and good big ones, their mama was able to sell more. She went to other restaurants besides the ones she worked at to sell some of them. The head cook at one of the big restaurants saw her bringing them in, and he agreed to make her a cook if she would bring him all her crawfish. Mama was more than happy to quit her old job, and she never had to wash dishes again. And everyone loved her cooking. Well, thank you, Duante. That was a great story. I'm glad you brought it to us. This is Fiona Fabble Stabble, Ghost and Ghost Rep, with Ghost Stories, The Flip Side. See you next time.
This has been Ghost Stories, The Flip Side. The ghosts thank you for listening and wish you a long and happy life.